we were looking at the latest diplomatic efforts between the United States and Iran. Now we are turning to another major development involving Washington, and this time the dispute is with one of America's closest allies. US-Canada trade talks have dramatically broken down, triggering a fresh round of tensions between the two neighbors. The dispute follows comments reportedly made by US Vice President J.D. Vance about Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, comments that have received significant attention in Canada.
Canada and China have been the two worst countries when it comes to trade policy anywhere in the world. What a shame that is. China, you of course expect. They're our biggest economic competitor. I would expect that from China. I would not expect that from Canada.
Following the fallout, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has walked away from negotiations over a new trade agreement and announced counter-tariffs on U.S. goods.
Today I'm announcing that Canada will match the United States tariffs dollar for dollar, rate for rate. Effective September 8, Canada will impose counter-tariffs of up to 15, 25 or 50% on $27.6 billion in imports from the United States of America. For each product, our tariff would match the American tariff on the same type of Canadian good.
And that matters because the United States and Canada conduct more than $800 billion annual bilateral trade. So what exactly went wrong? Could this latest dispute have longer-term consequences for one of the world's biggest trading relationships? And is Washington underestimating how far Canada is prepared to push back? To discuss this, let's bring our Washington correspondent, Jagruti Dave. Thank you, Jagruti, for joining me here on Overworld tonight. Well, let's start with the big picture here. What caused the latest US-Canada trade talks to collapse, and how serious is the current dispute?
Well, Pauline, I think the talks were on a knife edge and then they fell through at the last minute. They were seeking to renegotiate the terms of their trade agreements. The United States had been using tariffs to pressure other countries to accept deals when it comes to rebalancing the trade relationship with the United States. So the US had threatened Canada with 50% tariffs, and the United States is essentially blaming Canada, saying that they declined to accept a deal which they said gave them preferential treatment compared to other countries. Canada was saying that the US was asking for too much and not giving enough, saying that there were last-minute changes to the deal that were unfair, and so these talks have fallen through. This is, I think, the culmination of a long, rumbling dispute between the two sides when it comes to trade, but also other issues, and this now culminates in a really major break between the two North American neighbors.
Look, we also know that Vice President J.D. Vance's leaked comments about Prime Minister Mark Carney have received considerable attention in Canada. And what do you think, how much have those comments contributed to the deterioration in relations?
Well, Donald Trump has also been very vocal in his criticism of Canada and its premiers, both Mark Carney and his predecessor Justin Trudeau. And Donald Trump has made comments about, about Canada being the 51st state of the US, and essentially saying that that's what Canada wants to be treated like a member of the United States without joining the United States. So these sort of rhetorical forth between US officials, including the president, have happened, and there are premiers in Canada who are also hitting back at the US, being very critical, telling Mark Carney that they want to see hard retaliation. So I think there's no love lost between the two sides, and the fact that they are very vocally airing that displeasure is an indication just, again, of the significant breach between the two North American neighbors.
Look, Jagruti, Canada and the United States have one of the world's largest trading relationships. So what could these new tariffs mean for businesses and consumers on both sides of the border?
Yeah, this is potentially huge ramifications. If you look at the 50% retaliatory tariffs on hundreds of American products from Canada, it's a doubling of tariffs on American steel and aluminium. It would affect a range of goods, from things that people use in their homes, like aluminium foil sheets, to affecting the construction industry with steel bridges. You've got the dairy industry in the US, and the seafood industry that could be hit by 25% tariffs. And what Canada seems to be doing is hitting not just direct tit-for-tat action against the US, targeting the areas that the US has targeted Canada for, but it's also trying to hit those states by targeting specific goods that affect states in the US which have a significant exports to Canada. So you look at the targeting of seafood, lobster produced in Maine, a significant amount of that goes to Canada. You've got Michigan, the dairy industry is there. So this is Melanie Joly, the industry minister, has said clearly that some of the items that Canada has chosen to target are in states where voters have supported the president and clearly trying to put pressure on Republicans in the upcoming midterm elections.
All right, well, thank you, Jagruti, for joining me here on World Tonight. I appreciate it. Well, so two very different diplomatic battles are unfolding around Washington. With Iran, the U.S. is trying to use diplomacy alongside economic pressure to bring Tehran back to the negotiating table. With Canada, however, economic pressure has produced a much tougher response from a traditional U.S. ally. The question now is whether Washington can turn that pressure into new agreements, or whether these confrontations will leave lasting damage to some of America's most important international relationships. That's all for this edition of World Tonight. I'm Pauline. Thank you for watching.